climate change, pollution, freshwater use, deforestation, species extinction. These are all symptoms of a much broader, deeper problem. Today I'm going to be talking about why our diets and we have so much power as individuals to make a difference when it comes to climate change and environmental problems, but also why we have to go beyond that and why we have to take a broad, holistic perspective that isn't just focused in on a few scientific statistics and information. Animals like us go to the bathroom a lot, but at least here in the United States, we have a pretty decent waste management system. All of the farms, all of the literal billions of cows, pigs, chickens, and turkeys that we are breeding and bringing into existence for our food, these individuals that are raised and killed don't have waste management for their feces and excrement. So we produce millions of pounds of excrement that sit in these large open-air lagoons that just kind of off-gas, create pollutants on a lot of the low-income communities nearby that haven't had the resources to either move away or fight off the establishment of these farms. And one of the things that really stood out to me in this film, they talk about someone actually going into homes several miles away from these farms and like swabbing and wiping down the walls and finding like really thick amounts of pig feces on the walls several miles away from these farms. And one of the reasons for that is that when they have all these lagoons and all of this excrement and waste produced, which here's a really powerful statistic to consider. A single dairy farm with several thousand cows on it produces more waste than a city of 400,000 people. One average dairy farm, more waste than a city of several hundred thousand people. So that's how much excrement is being produced. And then farmers need something to do with it, so they try and repurpose it as fertilizer for crops that get fed to farmed animals as well. So they'll take low-flying planes, these giant hoses and nozzles, and just spray this all over their fields. And that's how it ends up in the air, stinking, smelling, causing asthma and health problems for the humans that live nearby and have to breathe this as well, ending up in their homes. And then this also runs off into our waterways and rivers and oceans, harming all of the life there and polluting them for us as well. Deforestation is one of the biggest that animal agriculture is driving. We hear a lot about the Amazon rainforest destruction. What a lot of people don't realize is that more than 80% of Amazon rainforest deforestation, more than 80% of the land that's already been deforested there, currently has cows grazing on it. And that is the driving factor of rainforest destruction down there. And then of the other 20%, a lot of that land is being used to grow corn and soy, and people will say, oh, but what about corn and soy? You know, you vegans and your tofu, you're deforesting land too. When they don't realize that the vast majority of corn and soy crops grown in the Amazon and around the world, in the US included, are being used as feed crops to feed to cows, pigs, chickens, and turkeys. Why is this? Why does raising and killing animals for food have such a huge impact on our planet and the environment? I believe it comes down to an inherent inefficiency that we are ignoring most of the time. And if you think about it, any animal products, they take enormous and disproportionate resources because we have to use land, water, time, energy to feed and raise and grow up a cow, pig, chicken, or turkey, you know, for several months to several years, depending on the species, until they're big enough and fat enough to be profitable to be slaughtered for meat. So if we think about it differently, if we spent all of that time, energy, water, money, land, and use that to grow feed directly for people instead of feeding these animals, growing feed crops to feed them, and giving all of our resources to them, and then us getting, you know, a little bit of something from them, it would be so much more efficient. So there's just this inherent inefficiency with cycling resources and nutrients through another living being before consuming them ourselves for energy. And I hear a lot of people talk about the food system or the food chain and say, well, like, we humans are, you know, at the top of the food chain. We've worked our way up here. We deserve to get to slaughter and kill other sentient beings, I guess. But it's really common. I hear that argument a lot when I'm going around and speaking to people. And here's what I say. Like, that's great if you think it's natural to eat other animals, but what else about your lives right now are you doing that's natural? Most of us probably drove here in cars. We live in homes built with machinery, probably have air conditioning. We go to the grocery store to get our food, and when people say it's natural to eat meat, what is natural about buying a styrofoam case of eggs or a plastic-wrapped piece of someone else's flesh that was out of sight, out of mind? You have no idea how it was raised, killed, got to your plate. Or chicken wings from a fast food restaurant that have been cooked and created and look nothing like the individual or animal they once came from. That is not natural. So don't sit here and tell me that it's natural that we eat meat when most of what we're talking about are fast food restaurants and plastic-wrapped pieces of flesh. We have a choice as humans with logic and intelligence and free will. Every time we go to the store or choose what we eat, we're making a choice. We're voting with our dollar. We're setting an example. We're that living, walking billboard of what we care about. And we have a choice as to whether we want to be at the top of the food chain, which we absolutely can, but which is incredibly inefficient and takes so much more energy, resources, water, and food to sustain the life of a single individual behaving as a carnivore. Or we have the choice to behave as what we actually and I'm sure you'll hear about this later, are designed to actually thrive on as an herbivore, and eat lower on the food chain, directly eating the plants that this earth grows and produces, rather than consuming all of these excess resources and creating this disproportionate environmental impact. So that's a choice that everyone sitting here today has. Every one of us always has a choice when we are going to the store and purchasing food. That is a vote with your dollar for what kind of world you want to see and what you care about. Has anyone else here heard that system change, not individual change narrative recently? It's becoming a lot more popular. And there's a piece of it, I want to be clear, that I agree with and I understand where it's coming from. Some people say that it was the fossil fuel companies that created the individual change narrative of change your light bulbs and drive less in the first place to distract from putting pressure on them. But that's in a very different segment of this environmental problem. Talking about fossil fuels versus driving less, and that's a little bit different than talking about the food we eat and our food system. One reason why is if we were to put pressure on corporations and have them change the way we want in terms of our energy infrastructure, behind the scenes they could switch to renewable energy with a much less environmental impact and very little relative impact on us. Like when I flip on the lights in my house, I don't really notice like, oh, is that energy coming from coal or is that energy coming from solar panels? To me, as the consumer, it doesn't really make much of a difference. It doesn't impact my ability to turn the lights on. But when it comes to food, we cannot change the food system behind the scenes without us being willing to change something too. Because you can't just change the food system plant-based and have people like not notice a difference. They're going to notice because the food that's going to be served places, the food that's going to be available at grocery stores is going to change if we're talking about system change. And a lot of people still don't want that. So when people aren't willing to make that change, we can't talk about system change. We can't have system change that the people don't want either. So that's why I really believe with these environmental problems, with trying to create a different paradigm with which we live on this planet, change has to start with us. Because while we can talk about system change all day long, at the end of the day, the only thing that we each truly have control over are our personal choices and our daily actions. So we can go and point the finger and tell governments and corporations to change, and they do. There are a lot of aspects of our system that are unfair and biased when it comes to subsidies and our tax dollars being used to bail out the dairy industry. Those things absolutely need to change. But how can we expect the CEOs of corporations to be willing to give up some of their profits, or our politicians to, risk not being reelected, if we're not willing to give up a burger for a bean burrito? We have to be willing to change what we're doing in our lives if we want other people to change. The change must start with us. Our tax dollars are being used to artificially keep up the supply of milk. The consumption of milk and purchases of milk and dairy products are at a record low right now. Consumers have been voting with their dollar and saying, I don't want this anymore, or 75% of the world is lactose intolerant. This isn't healthy for me. I'm not a baby cow and I want to drink almond, soy, coconut, oat milk. And we see the explosion of all of these options available at the grocery store. And yet, dairy supply hasn't changed a whole lot. And that's because the government is coming in and using our tax dollars and giving them to dairy farmers and saying, well, we're going to bail you out. We're going to keep you producing milk and keep you profitable, keep milk prices artificially cheap and lower than many of the alternatives through this biased, rigged political system. Every choice you make influences, consciously or unconsciously, the people around you. So that's why veganism is so much more than a boycott, and it's really about living in your values, living the kind of future you want to see. And that starts every day, and every single day that you go to the store and make food choices and purchases, you have that power again and again and again. And there is no other daily action or choice in our lives that we get to make so frequently that has such an impact both directly and indirectly on the world around us. There's a lot of social change research that suggests we don't need a majority or more than a majority of the population to do something for it to change rapidly. Social change actually has been shown to happen not on a linear scale, but on this slow progression where some kind of tipping point is reached, where then a paradigm shifts very rapidly. And they're called paradigm shifts, where we thought one thing that was the norm in society, and it quickly changed to something else being the norm. And I think that's what we're approaching with veganism. We actually only need between 10 to 25% of the population to strongly hold a belief before we reach these tipping points, where then suddenly everything changes very rapidly. So this is what gives me hope, and what I encourage all of you to keep thinking about if you feel hopeless or you feel like I'm just one person, my choices don't make a difference.